Hi there, and welcome to the Heart of It All. The confusion around long term care homes and retirement communities and nursing homes is significant. What is paid for by our government, and what are we responsible for? How much does what we can pay affect our care? What's private and what's public? So many questions, and we are going to answer them all today with lawyer and advocate for the elderly, Melissa Miller. I am Teri Hart, and welcome to this week's podcast. We drop new episodes every Tuesday, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. One of the truths about why I started this podcast is because I wanted to learn. I want to make the right decisions for my own life and for the people who I will help to provide care for. We also aren't taught any of this. We're left to figure it out when we need to, and I just like to be a bit more prepared than that. I hate having to respond to a crisis with no previous knowledge. So I am learning right alongside you, and thanks for going on this journey with me. In the interest of full transparency, I don't fully understand the difference between a nursing home or a retirement home or long-term care home. Are they all the same? What should we expect from where many of us will live for the last years of our life? And yes, I know the vast majority of folks want to age in place, but for many, and probably I hate to tell you most of us, that simply won't be possible. We have to understand what these facilities or places offer, what do we need to look for, and so many other factors. Melissa Miller is an advocate for the most vulnerable members of our population, the elderly. Being certified in elder law, she concentrates on nursing home negligence, long-term care cases, and elder abuse. She is also a member of many professional associations, sat on the board of directors of the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association, and started her own organizations, Canadians for LTC and Lawyers for LTC, which advocate for broader systemic change to long-term care across Canada. Melissa is also the subject of a National Film Board of Canada documentary, Stolen Time, about the systemic issues in long-term care. Melissa, welcome to the Heart of It All.
Thanks so much, Teri. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's so nice to see you. All right, let's just dive right in. I promised we were going to answer all the questions. So, what is the difference between a retirement community, a long-term care home, and a nursing home?
Yeah, this is a really great place to start. I would say nursing home is a bit more of a colloquial term. It's probably a more antiquated. It's an umbrella term. It is what we tend to think of as a congregate living setting where people who need assistance or nursing care go live. The real distinction is between long-term care homes and then retirement homes, which is also its own little bit of umbrella term. So we'll talk about long-term care homes first. Long-term care homes are subsidized by the government. They receive all of their funding directly from the government and whatever copay there is from the resident that is paying. They're very regulated by the government. They are for complex care needs. Okay, so this is the most complex, expensive care you can get, probably outside of an ICU, intensive care unit, or something like that, right? Like this is meant for complex long-term stays. So usually you're talking about people who have more than one major health issue. So they have a mobility issue and maybe they have heart issues or diabetes. Maybe they have dementia and they also have issues with eating or vision issues. They need help generally with most activities of daily living, the very basics like toileting, getting dressed, things like that, and a lot of monitoring around their nursing care. Okay. Retirement homes, on the other hand, are private. They are not funded at all by the government. Now, there are a few exceptions that are government run retirement homes, but by and large, they are not. And they're actually governed by some retirement home legislation and the Residential Tenancies Act, because when you go into a retirement home, you're actually going into a tenancy agreement with the licensee of the retirement home, which is now your landlord for all intents and purposes. So there's both of these things happening. And retirement homes are kind of an umbrella. So a lot of people know about the independent living side. You're in the community, but you've got your own apartment, right? You're living alone, but you go to social events. And if you need anything, there's a concierge service, but you're cooking your own meals, you're doing all your own things, you're living alone. Then there's retirement home proper, where you've got a room there, maybe a bit of a kitchenette, but you go to the dining hall for your meals, you get laundry service, cleaning service, and then assisted living is that plus ad hoc care. And there's usually different levels.
So you could go into a retirement community. That is where you are paying to live. And there's a grand spectrum of how much it costs to live in a retirement community based on how fancy it is and what level of care you might or might need in there. And then you just keep adding on to more levels of care. And that's all private. It is not subsidized by the government.
Correct.
Then, if you reach a point that your care becomes too complex for the retirement community, then you go into a long-term care home.
Yes, that's the simplest way of putting it, although there can be some overlap. It's possible that you qualify for long-term care, but you're also paying for the highest level of care in a retirement home. To give you an example of that, most people are paying on average $6,000 or $7,000 a month at a retirement home with like minimal assistance. The moment you start needing help with things like getting dressed and showering and toileting, that price starts going up. And I've got clients who are paying upwards of $15,000 to $18,000 a month to live in a retirement home. And by the time you get to that level, some homes are capable of providing that level of care, but you would probably also qualify for long-term care, which would be a lot cheaper because it's subsidized.
And does that mean some people might choose to pay that amount of money if they have that amount of money because it is and I'm going to put in quotes here, a nicer facility than a long-term care home?
Yes, that's one of the reasons why people might choose that. I think some people are also of the mindset, well, you get what you pay for. If I'm paying top dollar for something, then I should be getting the best care. But you also just might be waiting for a bed to open up in long-term care. And so you're kind of stuck paying that until you get a bed in a long-term care home that you want.
Retirement communities, we've got that covered. You might go in for a multitude of reasons. You probably could have a long stay there depending on how your needs for care develop, if you have the financial means to do so.
Yeah.
Getting into a long-term care facility, 100% of long-term care facilities are subsidized by the Canadian government. Is that true?
By the Ontario government, yes.
Okay, so we're talking Ontario because
Yes.
this is healthcare and we are provincially
Yes.
regulated.
That is
Okay.
correct. You
I'm
got it,
trying to be
Teri, you got it.
I'm trying to be a quick learner. So, a long-term care facility, why would somebody need to go into a long-term care facility?
Look, most of the people who are in long-term care probably thought, I never want to end up in a long-term care home and don't want to be there. But at some point, most people don't have a choice. So let's say you have a horrible fall and you fracture a hip and now you can't walk by yourself. But you also happen to have cardiac issues and diabetes and you have some dementia. You've got a lot going on now. You can't manage your care at home. You can't live alone. It's probably even too much for a retirement home. And you need to have round the clock care. So you are a candidate for long-term care. I would say most of the people that I run into, most of the families that I deal with, um, these families have tried their best to keep their loved one at home and out of a long-term care home for as long as possible. So I find most people, it's kind of a very difficult bullet to bite that you end up in long-term care. It's not anyone's first choice that I've ever run into. Let's put it that way. So you really need the help.
All of our long-term care facilities are subsidized by our government. Why are there people making money from them?
Oh, this is the best question ever. I mean, this is the heart of the matter. I have a huge bone to pick with anybody that's making money off of profiting off of taxpayer dollars. I mean, this is the crux of the issue. So you have around 70% of long-term care homes are run by for-profit companies. Most of them are chains. Okay. So what happens is they get the money in. Now, there are two envelopes of funding. I want to be fair about that. Okay. The money that comes in from the government comes in two formats. There's the money that's allocated for care, and then there's the money that's allocated for hospitality, which is for things like cleaning, laundry, food, modernizing the building, air conditioning. Okay. All of the things that we hear about in the news, those are the corners that get cut. So these companies will cut corners on the hospitality side of things, which is where they make their money. Not for profit.
Can I change the word? Can I change the word hospitality to infrastructure? Because hospitality makes it sound like it's Julie on the Love Boat.
Yeah, you want to know why? Because most of the people who run these companies have no medical background. They're all from the hospitality industry. I can't tell you how many defendants I've examined under oath in my lawsuits whose backgrounds are hotels. Yeah,
Okay.
that's who's running. They run them like these profit machines, and that's why we heard a lot about the fact that there isn't modernization. We hear a lot in the news about the lack of air conditioning in the summer. These are huge issues because that's where corners get cut because they're not allowed to profit off of the care. The money that gets allocated for care has to be spent on care. But not for profit homes and municipally run or government run homes often will take that extra money, if there is savings on the hospitality side of things, and put it back into care where they will hire more people. That's the part that's missing on the for-profit side, to put it simply.
How do you know if the long-term care facility you are looking at is for profit, like privately owned for profit, as you said, 70% are, or if it's a municipally run, fully government funded long-term care home? How do you know the difference?
That is all very transparent information. So anybody looking for a home, you want to go to the ministry's website, the Government of Ontario, the Ministry of Long-Term Care. It's publicly available. You can look up any home. You can see who's the actual licensee, which is important because sometimes you'll have the licensee of the home, and then it'll also tell you if there's a management company. So some of these companies that have been, quote, I will say, not run out of business, but been getting a bad rap in the public eye are either changing their name or they're hiring other companies to run the home, which are equally as bad. So they'll be the management of the home. So all of that's publicly available. You can see it. You can look up the home by name. You can check their history of long-term care inspections. So the ministry will go in and do inspections further to complaints, to critical incidents like major injuries or death that shouldn't have happened, or abuse, or unannounced inspections. So all of those reports are publicly available on that same website where you can find out the information about the home.
Can you remind us of what that website is, Melissa, please?
If you Google long-term care reports Ontario, it'll take you right to it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to be Googling that after listening to this episode.
And by the way, likewise, you can also, the Retirement Home Regulatory Authority is the governing body over retirement homes. You can similarly look them up and look at their history because the RHRA will do inspections of retirement homes and people can make complaints to the RHRA if they think there's been poor care or abuse as well. So all of those reports are publicly available for people to look at as well.
Okay, we love the advocacy. We love allowing people to know what is going on when they're looking to make decisions about where their loved one is going to live. Okay, so just to recap, we have retirement communities that are private, that people go and live in when maybe they need a little help with meals, they want some companionship. There's a myriad of reasons that somebody might choose to pay to live in a retirement community. Then we have long-term care facilities. Those are places that people go to when they have more complex needs. 70% of them are privately owned, but they get a subsidy from the Ontario government that comes in two different tranches, one for care and another for hospitality, which, as you describe it, I think of as like infrastructure.
You're right. It is infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting it. I think we're getting close to understanding the complications. Now, give us an idea of the numbers. How many long-term care facilities, how many retirement homes, and how many people are looking to live in these places?
So retirement homes, I'm not sure how many there are. There are a lot, and because there's so many different variations, but I can tell you there's like over 600 long-term care homes in Ontario. Those numbers are easier to gather. So 625 SOAR homes is around 77,000 beds. Yeah, that's how many people are in long-term care, and then there's over 50,000 people who are waiting for a bed for long-term care. There's not
Oh my.
really a wait list for retirement homes because there's so many different kinds of options. It's because it's all private. It's the market, the free market, really makes the retirement home setting very competitive, and so you get all sorts of different rankings and variations, and you do get what you pay for in many ways in retirement homes. But long-term care homes, it's extremely difficult to get in because of how many people need it.
We know, and we speak on this podcast frequently about the fact that 96% of Canadians over the age of 65 say that they want to age in place. So why are so many people on this wait list?
First and foremost, it's because they need it. And oftentimes there's nowhere else for them to go. And I think when you start looking at the long-term care problem, it really starts to highlight some of the other deficiencies across our other systems, like at-home care, hospitals. In fact, Ford's piece of legislation as a way to help this issue, which is a huge problem, is called More Beds, Better Care Act. I can tell you that better care is not the result of this piece of legislation. This is a legislation that he passed that basically can force someone into long-term care without their consent. That's the legislation that he passed. And
How are
so
we
what happened?
forcing people into long-term care when we've got 50,000 people on a wait list?
Because some homes are better than others, and some of them are in very remote locations. So if you're in a hospital setting and you are no longer acute, so you have stabilized, you do not need an acute hospital care. You are now considered alternative level of care, ALC. And that means that you are now either should you're awaiting you're awaiting some other transition. Most of the people who are ALC are awaiting long-term care. And his way, or this government's way of getting people out of the hospitals to make room in the hospitals, let's not, fund our hospitals properly and staff them properly, but let's just force people out sooner than they should. Now the hospital can coordinate with HCCSS, which is the organization that you have to go through. They're kind of like the liaison. They used to be the LIN. They used to be HCSS. Now they're OHA, Ontario Health at Home. They keep changing their name all the time. They're the liaison between the homes and the hospital, or you and the homes. And this piece of legislation gives the hospitals and OHA the power to start a long-term care application, whether you've agreed to or not. And they'll put you into a home, whether you like it or not, with under a certain amount of requirements. And if you refuse, and if a bed becomes available and you refuse, you'll be charged a co-payment of up to $400 a day to stay in the hospital. And a lot of people don't know their rights around this. And so they get scared. They can't afford $400 a day. I mean, not many people can, especially when you're a vulnerable person with health issues and you're a senior and living off of a pension. And so they just agree to go into these homes. And the homes that have the most availability are usually the ones with the worst track records.
Okay, I have a few questions.
I'm sure you do.
Number one, um, we've also heard that they can place people in homes up to like 100-kilometer or 75-kilometer radius.
Yeah, this legislation allows that to happen. So, and that's a big deal because, in some, like I have a client whose mom was in the Owen Sound, a home in Owen Sound, right? And if you look at that region, it's like, okay, we'll just go to a home in Meaford or go to a home in Wyerton or whatever. Well, that's the snow belt. And we know how important it is for families to be a part of care, even in a long-term care setting, and how, we saw that during the pandemic. And I know we're probably going to talk about that later. And so having that kind of distance, especially in the wintertime in Ontario, is a huge deal.
Especially when when the closest family member might be another senior.
Yeah.
Might be somebody who is that
Exactly.
person's spouse and is in their same
Yep.
cohort.
Yep.
So we had another person on the podcast talking about where to live, which is the hottest button issue when we're talking about caregiving. She said that the best path to take, if one can afford it, is to get into a retirement community before maybe you need to be in a retirement community, so that then you can have graduated care there for as long as possible and not have to go to a long-term care facility. Do you agree with that?
I see some of the gaps in the retirement communities too, where, you know, look, it's all private, right? So these homes make a lot of money off of people using these ad hoc services and everything. And sometimes I think that keeps people in a retirement home longer than they should. And so there's distinct gaps. There's distinct injuries that I see. And the ones in retirement homes are usually when someone is maintaining independence for longer than they should, and they really just need more eyeballs to watch some of what they're doing or to have more checks. I got to tell you, the amount of cases I've had where someone has had a fall in their room for whatever reason, not anybody's fault, but then are left for days, several days without anyone finding out, and either have extreme medical implications or they die as a result. I've had like a dozen cases like that, retirement homes. And that's because they kind of fall in the crack. There's like this gap where they probably should have had more care, but they were doing sort of just fine, and then someone forgot the wellness check in the morning, or maybe they didn't track whether they came into the dining room for lunch. And it's these little things that can snowball into these huge issues. So I think you have to be careful with that. I think there's, you touched on this earlier. There's this, everybody wants to stay at home for as long as possible, right? Um, but we have a lot of issues there too. We don't have our home care system properly funded, but more importantly, we do not have a preventative healthcare system. Our healthcare system is like whack-a-mole, right? Something crops up, you whack it with a mole. That's how I describe it. Really, what our seniors need is earlier intervention with their GPs, their family doctors.
If they
Um,
have a GP.
if they have a GP, with and it's hard with the generation right now that is needing this care. I mean, they're called the silent generation for a reason. This is not a generation of individuals that is used to talking about their problems. But you know when they need help is usually identified when it's a little too late. They've already had the fall. They're already far along in their dementia, right? It's their kids that are like, "Oh my god, walked in the house and the stove was on and every light is on and they were wearing their underwear and didn't know where their shoes were." And then it's a panic, right? As opposed to helping seniors stay involved in their community. The single most important factor, we know this from Blue Zone data, we know this from dementia and Alzheimer's data, we know this from, the studies that were done in nursing homes, is your social being. You need to maintain your sense of community as you age. It's one of the most important health indicators. It helps your cognition. It keeps you plugged in to what's happening. and it helps your mental health. Those are the huge markers. And we need more resources to keep seniors involved so that they're not just staying home all the time, that they're still going out and playing bingo or meeting up with their friends at the coffee shop or, doing their own grocery shopping. Maybe I think more seniors probably need a companion before they need any medical care. And then once you have that community built up, and then that companion can help you navigate these things. Because let's face it, the adult children are usually sandwiched between the peak of their career, taking care of their own kids, and having to now take care of their aging parents. It's too much. And so I think we need to start integrating more community-based wellness with our seniors and our aging communities so that there isn't this emergency that happens because they have a fall at home and now they're paralyzed on half of their body, and they need help with every activity of daily living. That's a traumatic ending to your independent living, right? Aging is one of the only things within our society that I've noticed where we don't have social constructs of support. People get married. There's huge to-dos about that. People graduate from high school and even elementary school, and there's huge to-dos about that. There's a lot of social structure around that. There's no social structure around retirement or around moving out of the home where you raised your children. It all just kind of happens, usually after something bad happens. And that's what I think we need to do better at getting in front of.
What did COVID unveil? What did we learn in the pandemic that we cannot unlearn?
We learned how underfunded long-term care is. We learned how difficult it is for staff to work in the conditions that they work. There's a leading academic and researcher, Pat Armstrong. I quote her all the time. The conditions of work are the conditions of care. It just is that way in these care homes. Most of the staff are underpaid, overworked, under-resourced. Many of these women, I will say women because most of the care providers are women, which, we can have another podcast talking about how we undervalue women's work in our society, and this is a manifestation of that. But they are working multiple jobs. We are in such a staffing crisis in long-term care that people are getting thrown into the deep end without the right amount of training. The very seasoned professionals have all but left because of extreme burnout, mostly during COVID. It's the underbelly of our society. It's the underbelly of our healthcare system. And then the other thing that we learned is how important families are, how important it is to have family structure integrated into care. These families are the reason why there aren't more injuries and deaths happening in homes, because they're there making noise, being the squeaky wheel every damn day. As a result of COVID, our government impaneled the Long-Term Care Commission. And there was a commission that took testimony from various players in the long-term care community, including some of my clients gave evidence. And one of the biggest recommendations that came out of that long-term care commission report is that there should be no profit in the care to residents of long-term care homes. I wish that the report said that there shouldn't be any for-profit companies allowed at all, but the recommendation was that they could be allowed to own the buildings and the property, but they shouldn't be allowed to make profit off of the care that's being provided.
I have a question. We're Canadian. We live in Canada. We very much pride ourselves on our universal health care. Why is there profit being made? Is this not considered health care?
So there is federal legislation. So the federal government does provide funding to the provinces for healthcare and long-term care. The provinces have to abide by the Canada Health Act in order to receive their funding. One of the elements of the Canada Health Act is that we have a universal healthcare system. Okay? So your funding has to uphold universal healthcare for all Canadians. One of my projects during the pandemic was to have similar legislation for long-term care homes and for the government to uphold the same standard in order for provinces to receive long-term care funding. Never happened. I even belonged to a group that we drafted the legislation. Didn't get anywhere, couldn't get sign off from all the provinces. I'm sure you can guess which ones. But now we're seeing even an eroding of our universal health care in Ontario. And we're not seeing the federal government do anything about it. I think there's a beginning of a call to action for that to start happening. But we're seeing this government send our taxpayer dollars to private clinics for hip replacements and knee replacements and colonoscopies and all of these standard procedures where we've got huge backlog. We're now, as taxpayers, paying 2 to 3 times the cost.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Because these are government subsidized private businesses, the long-term care homes, 70% of them in Ontario fall into that category. Could I, as a resident, or if I have a loved one living there, can I pay extra to the long-term care home to get better food or to have a different room or to have more PSW support? Is there a two-tiered system within our long-term care facilities?
Not quite, but I think we're kind of at the beginning of it. So your long-term care home is your home. So you can, as long as you don't have any specific dietary restrictions, like some people have to have a minced diet or a liquid diet or things like that. If you don't have swallowing issues, it's your home. You can have whatever food you want. So if your family chooses to bring in food, as long as it's in accordance with your care plan, you can eat that food. Okay. You can also hire extra support. Now the only sort of extra that you can pay for within a home through the existing system is if you want a private room or a semi-private room. That costs more. But if you want to supplement the care that you're getting, in fact, I recommend across the board that people, if they can afford it, should have a PSW or even a companion be an extra set of eyes and ears in addition to the staff, especially if you have someone with really complex care needs. I tell families to get an extra PSW in there and cameras. This is the new thing. Get cameras in there.
Do you have to tell the staff that you've put cameras in? Is that legally correct?
So a lot of homes are now starting to have their own policies around cameras, and most of the time you have to sign off on their policy when you go in. If you've signed off on a policy, you've basically agreed to the contract. You've got to consult the policy. Usually the policy is you can't have the camera pointed, like if you have a shared room, you can't have it pointing at the other resident. You can't have it pointing into the hallway. You need to have a sign on the door that says, you're being recorded when you walk in here. Some of them have policies around sound, which I'll get to. But if there's no policy and you haven't signed anything, put the camera in. Let me just address the sound on the cameras. It's a pretty big issue.
Thank you.
The criminal code says that it is illegal, it is a criminal offense to record a conversation unless at least one person who is participating in the conversation has consented to being recorded. So where's the gray area in long-term care? Well, you're the substitute decision maker for mom or dad. You're consenting. Does the consent of the substitute decision maker satisfy that requirement? We don't know the answer. It's never been litigated. But if you ask any of the lawyers at the Advocacy Center for the Elderly or myself, or quite frankly, any of the other elder law lawyers I know in this area, we would say it is enough. But I want to be clear, it's never been litigated. There hasn't been a test case. And homes are starting to get, be alive to the issue, and so they're having people sign off on policies that there's no sound. If I have anything to say around it, I tell people to push back on that, because I can't tell you how many times the sound has saved someone's life. Because sometimes the staff will throw a towel over the camera, or they'll purposely block to see, what's going on. And you can hear the way that someone's being spoken to or yelled at. It's alarming, the things that I've heard on camera. Get a camera.
Is there one problem that needs to be fixed? Is there one thing that would put our long-term care facilities on a different track than they're on now?
I mean, don't we all wish that it was as simple as that, right? Um, I think long-term care is the most expensive form of healthcare you can have, probably outside of an intensive care admission, okay? It is just extremely costly. We need there to be less people in need of long-term care. That should be the goal. It shouldn't be the case that our healthcare system ignores, and then the whack-a-mole is the most expensive mole there is, being long-term care. Because then our taxpayer dollars can go further. And then it becomes more possible to do the next big thing, and that is to properly support and pay the staff. Long-term care workers are paid a third of their counterparts in acute care. Nurses, PSWs, they're making a third of what their counterparts are in hospitals. So why would they want to work in long-term care? They're going to want to go work in a hospital, right? So, you have to properly support the people who are providing, I think, some of the most difficult work there is. This is hard work. It's not easy. And quite frankly, most of the staff just need more time with each of the residents. They're just rushed. Most of the issues in long-term care can be addressed by having more time with the resident, one-to-one with staff, in my experience that I see.
Okay. So if somebody is in a situation listening to this right now and they know they have reached the end of their tether and they know that they have to find a long-term care facility for somebody that they are caring for, what are the things, Melissa, that they should look for with their own two eyes, like actually set eyes on when they go into a home? What should they be looking for?
So the first thing is you want to avoid the chandelier effect. Many of these homes, they have these beautiful chandelier in the lobby, maybe the common area, nice trim. They got flowers out. Sometimes some of these homes will even sort of have their best residents. If they know someone's coming in for a showing, that's this kind of more retirement homes and long-term care homes. Some retirement homes, they have spokespeople, residents who are kind of they're sales agents, so to speak, right? Less so in long-term care, but you want to see the rooms. You want to get past the front lobby. You want to see the rooms. You want to see the TV room, and what do the residents look like who are in there who are watching TV? Is it a whole bunch of people slumped over in a wheelchair, stuck in front of a show that no one's watching? Are all these residents sleeping in their wheelchairs parked right outside the nurse's station because they don't have enough people to do rounds in the rooms? Does it smell like urine? If so, it's probably because they're not changing people's diapers enough. If a lot of people need assistance with feeding, sometimes they have these special feeding tables. So you have one care worker in the table and you'll have 3 people around the table and they have to feed all 3 people. But some of these places, they don't have that. And so there's just people sitting in their wheelchair with food in front of them, but they can't eat it. And so, they're waiting for someone to help them. You want to be looking for that kind of stuff, right? Ask to see the shower facilities. See everything.
Okay, so that's the stuff we need to set our eyes on. What are the questions we should be asking? Actual language for people.
I think that's very dependent on your loved one's needs. But one of the things that I think is a good catch-all is What steps are you going to implement to maintain my mom or dad's independence? Now, that's an umbrella question. So if my mom is using a cane and sometimes a walker, what steps are you going to ensure that she's not going to end up in a wheelchair in 3 months? How are you going to get her to participate in group exercises and physiotherapy? If you have someone with dementia who you know that it takes like a lot of effort to get them to eat or shower, what steps are you going to do? What language are you going to use to make my mom want to take a shower? Because otherwise she's going to say no. And if you're just going to chart refused care over and over again, my mom's going to end up in the hospital and she's going to die. So what are you going to do? I would ask them, if there's a script that you find helpful with your loved one, for dementia or Alzheimer's, ask them to incorporate that into the care plan. So an example is, I ask you, Teri, okay, let's go shower. No. Meanwhile, your daughter knows that if I walk into the room and say, "Hi, Teri, I'm Melissa," and I speak into your right ear because you're hard of hearing on the left ear, and I hold your hand gently, not too hard, and I introduce myself fully. I'm here. I'm going to take you to your shower. It's time to have your shower, Teri. And you still say no, but say, yeah, but you know what? Your daughter's going to be by later and she's going to ask me if you had your shower. You don't want to disappoint your daughter, do you? Oh, yes, that's right. Okay, I better go have my shower. That's what works for you. That conversation is different for everybody. Make sure the script of that conversation is in the care plan. And if it changes, maybe you like to have a certain stuffed animal with you while you're in your wheelchair on the way to lunch. And if you don't have that stuffed animal with you, you're not going to want to go to lunch.
It's a
Those
bad day.
details need to be included in the care plan.
And what troubles me about this is when we're talking about this wait list, this 50,000 people wait list, this, people struggling to find a long-term care facility for their person to live in, and they're desperate, right? So then I think they're afraid to be a problem.
Mm,
Being vulnerable and being desperate, that's a really dangerous
yeah.
combination. How do you advise somebody through those two very challenging emotional states?
Well, I think that's where family and community supports come in, right? Nobody wants to feel like a burden on their family. And so it's usually the family who are like, you're not a burden. I'm here. I will do whatever you want, coupled with proper community support so that that family isn't suffering from caregiver burnout and completely overwhelmed with their own life. And that's what I think we need to do a better job of in general. Because if our aging seniors know that there's a better social structure available to support them, they're going to be more willing to ask for help and they're going to feel less like a burden on their children. There's a lot that goes with that, and we need to maintain self-confidence and self-worth among our seniors, and that is a combination of family and community services in my mind.
There are going to be more people that need more help as we are living into our 90s and beyond. Is home care what we really need to be looking at in terms of improving this stage of life for people?
It is, but earlier. I'll give you an example. If you have a fall at home because you're trying to do everything yourself. Like my mom honestly is the perfect example of this. Like she was one of those people who would just like hang up her own cabinets, and she's doing things on a shoddy ladder with bare feet, and the amount of times she's had an injury, and I was just like, if you fall off a ladder and break your hip, like I'm going to kill you. Right? We've had those conversations. But that's the loneliness part of it. So it's a lot of times is like trying to do things by yourself for longer than you should results in an injury that then removes your independence entirely. So I think home care that gets a little bit in front of that, like I said, more of the companionship, um, having someone to come in once a week and like, hey, what do you need help with this week? You need some light bulbs changed so you don't fall off a ladder? You need me to unclog that drain in your bathroom sink? The little things that, you kind of lose track of when you get older, and maybe you care a little less about until they snowball. Maybe you have family who can do that, but not everybody does. Or, like I said, keeping you active. So making sure that you're going out for your walk every day. Maybe you just need someone to go with you to make sure that you do it. Do your exercises. Glute strength and hip mobility are two of the most important things that you need as you age. Those are the things. And then like it's so much less expensive for our government to supplement that kind of care so that you're not waiting until someone's already been in the hospital and now needs help 3 times a day showering and getting dressed, and you have a PSW coming in from an agency that can only be there for a half an hour at a time, that you're trying to get them to do all these other little things, right? So I think it's a bit of planning. We need to just plan better.
I will add to this, the unpaid caregivers that are part of the ecosystem of our healthcare are carrying the weight of that as well.
Yeah.
Like, we have the societal shift of what families look like now are also impacting all of this care problem that we are experiencing in our very wealthy first world country.
I have some ideas around this. They are very infant ideas, but I've had a couple of situations, including my own, where I lived with my grandmother when I was an undergrad. My grandfather died when I was 6 months living there. I became my grandmother's everything, and I replaced him. We were each other's companion, and it was the best experience I possibly could have had because she was my home. She became my best friend. I needed a free place to stay while I put myself through school, and she needed me. And it was this beautiful symbiotic relationship. And I know a couple of others who have had situations where their parent just needed a little bit of help. And so they had like a friend of theirs who was also going to university, like, hey, why don't you just stay together? You can help each other out, bring them grocery shopping, cut the grass. We need to create these symbiotic relationships outside of our biological families to enhance our communities, because we know from the studies are clear, when you put very small children and seniors together, both of their outcomes are improved. And you take starving students and aging seniors, you have able-bodied in need of financial assistance, and you have financially able for the most part, in need of physical assistance. We need to start partnering these groups together.
Yeah. I
In
love that
ways.
idea. Is there anywhere that you have seen positive changes? Are we moving in the right direction anywhere?
Believe it or not, the insurance companies who end up paying out these cases have become rather frustrated uh, that they're the ones having to pay out pursuant to these insurance claims, right? So it's like you have third party car insurance. Someone hits you with their car, your insurance covers that, right? So similarly, these homes have insurance. And when I sue them, it's their insurance company that's responding and paying out the claim. The insurance companies have actually been a rather effective lobby group within the government to bring about better inspection protocols, which was one of the reasons behind why Ford ramped up the inspections and enhanced their powers and things like that. Part of it is because of the insurance lobby group was asking the Ford government to do that. The other area where I've seen some improvement is public knowledge. People are alive to these issues. It matters because the more you know, the more you know, right? Like you know better, you do better. You know better, you expect better. You ask better questions. You ask your politicians to do their job. You ask for greater accountability from politicians. For the first time ever, it was in the midst of COVID. Long-term care was an election issue provincially and federally, and it's been an election issue ever since. and we have to keep it an election issue. And that's because of public pressure. And then the public is also who makes up juries in these lawsuits, right? And the more that a jury is aware of what's going on, the better informed of a jury I have, the more likely they're going to give a just result.
Melissa Miller, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are an angel, and I love what you do, and I love how you speak, and I'm so glad that I know you, truly.
Well, thank you so much, Teri. It's been great to be here.
Melissa Miller might actually be an angel. We all really have to do better. We must advocate, and we must do so before we're in the situation. It's not going to improve overnight. We should get angry, and we should demand better. Thanks so much to Melissa for being here and for her advocacy and passion for fighting for those who are so vulnerable. We do appreciate you listening and for your comments and shares of each of our episodes. This one is a great episode to share because, as we said, it is going to affect us all. Find us on all of the social channels at the Heart of It All Pod. We keep you posted on what's coming up on the show, and make sure you are subscribed as well. Thanks to Carrie and Jess from 6 of 1 Digital and to you for being here. Please take care. You must watch the documentary Stolen Time. It stars today's guest, lawyer Melissa Miller, and you will see her passionate fight and struggle against the worst offending for-profit nursing home industry. It is infuriating and upsetting, but as I said, after the first time I watched it, this should be required viewing for all Canadians. The best part? You can watch it for free on the National Film Board website, nfb.ca. Check it out and let me know what you think.